Bashar al-Assad's regime collapse so rapidly, sir?
We can cite three or four main factors behind the fall of, or the rather dramatic fall and rapid fall of President Bashar al-Assad and his regime. The first one is war fatigue. Syria has been mired in a civil war for over 13 years, so probably the resources of the country and the capabilities of the Syrian military and security forces were drained over the past years. So it is quite expected that they would not be able to last much longer. The second factor is the economic downturn Syria has been suffering over the past few years. Syria is, since the beginning of the war, has been under massive economic sanctions and economic isolation. And the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad was not able to deliver the basic necessities and the basic needs to its areas of control that exceeded 70% until the 26th of November 2024. And of course, the lack of political reforms is the third factor. President Assad has spectacularly failed in enacting any reforms after he managed to gain the battlefield initiative with the support of Russia and Iran. He could have put the country on a path of political reconciliation and political reform and transition. However, he elected not to. And of course, this impasse led to renewed conflict that led to the collapse of his government. And the last and fourth factor, which is the most important, is foreign meddling and foreign intervention. This attack by these armed factions was definitely bankrolled
Which
with,
kind of foreign interaction, sir, and intervention?
of course, foreign intervention, I believe, by a country like Turkey, by the United States, and maybe even by Israel. These countries had a vested interest in the collapse of the Assad regime, and probably they had a very prominent role in supporting the armed factions and the armed militias that led to the toppling of President Assad this morning.
Sir, how significant is the Syrian Prime Minister's promise to facilitate a smooth transition?
Well, that's a good sign on the side of the Prime Minister, and he promised to facilitate a smooth transition. However, the Prime Minister has absolutely no power over his own self. Even at this moment, he has no control over the Syrian government because the Syrian government does not exist anymore, and probably the Syrian state itself does not exist anymore. So he did this in an effort to adopt a conciliatory rhetoric or narrative in order to try to avoid any cycle of vindictive actions or active vengeance by the armed factions and opposition or rebels, whatever you call them, that marched into Damascus this morning. However, whether his intentions will be fulfilled by actual action on the ground remains to be seen.
Sir, you see his narrative as rational from your own perspective?
Of course it is. Of course it is. It's rational, it's responsible, it's patriotic. He does not want to see, he wants the bloodshed and the violence in his country to see an end. However, he might have kind wishes and he might be acting in the right manner. However, that does not guarantee that his goals or the desired results from his gestures will be delivered.
Perfect, sir. How will regime change in Syria impact the regional balance of power, sir?
Of course, it will impact the regional balance of power in a multitude of ways, but the most important event or regional actor that has been affected by this is Iran. Iran's role in Syria has now become non-existent. Iran was one of the most influential countries in Syria, if not the most influential country. It competed for the same amount of influence with the Russians. Now they basically do not exist anymore as a relevant actor inside Syria.
Again, sir, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to catch up with you. You're saying that Iran no more exists in Syria?
Yes, they barely
This
exist in
weakens
Syria.
Iran, sir?
Iran.
Yes?
Iran does not exercise any more influence in Syria anymore. They have become an irrelevant actor in the Syrian calculus. And this is just the fact of life because they invested everything in the Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad. And with the fall of the Syrian regime and its institutions and the withdrawal of the pro-Iranian militias from Syria, they do not have anyone or any actor on the ground that does their bidding anymore. So this, of course, will alter the balance of power in favor of Israel and the United States and against Iran. Definitely, because now Iran is in dire straits. Their main proxy in Lebanon has been devastated by war, that is Hezbollah, and now their main ally in Syria has fallen out of power. So now Iran has no presence on the borders of the state of Israel, which means that they cannot threaten them anymore or try to leverage them anymore in the future, in any potential future Middle East settlement that now seems to be more distant than ever with the very sad developments in Syria.
True, sir. Sir, considering Israel's latest provocations in Syria, how do you think this will play out in terms of preserving Syria's territorial integrity?
What happened in the Golan Heights today is what I feared and what I even warned of previously on Qnews a couple of days ago, and is that Israel has the most to gain from the fall of President Assad and the fall of the Syrian government and the Syrian state, and that they will take advantage of that to the most. And in fact, they did. Israel's provocations have went way and beyond. Today, they have invaded part of Syria's territory, creating a 5 kilometer deep buffer zone inside Syria. Benjamin Netanyahu brazenly declared that the 1974 ceasefire agreement or de-escalation agreement between Syria and Israel is dead, and it means that not only will he be content with the occupation of the Golan Heights, which they have occupied for the past 50 years, 50 plus years. Now they even moved and they occupied the city of Qneys and a number of other cities that used to be in the UN buffer zone. And they might even expand further. The Israeli chief of staff said that now Israel is at war on 4 fronts, and the fourth front is Syria, which means that Israel will carry out more acts of aggression against Syria. And they did today. They destroyed Al-Mazza airport or Al-Mazza military airport or air base in Damascus today, and they destroyed a multitude of military targets today and military storage facilities inside Syria, which is an indication of what is to come and how Israel will interact with Syria and how they will pursue their expansionist ambitions on the expense of Syrian territorial integrity and sovereignty. And of course, they might take advantage of the severing of the land bridge between Iran and Hezbollah and Lebanon in order to resume their war of aggression on Lebanon against Hezbollah and against the Lebanese state itself, potentially.
Okay, Dr. Osman, with the rise of the HTS to an apparent position of prominence in Syria, how will this shape the country's political landscape and what will happen in north of Syria at this point as we discuss the situation in Syria?
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or HTS, an international terrorist organization, and I have to remind our viewers that it is, has
Again,
become
sir, what did you say?
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, I have to remind our dear viewers that it is an international terrorist organization.
International terrorist organization.
Yes, that's what it is, according to the United Nations. These are not my words or the words of the Russian
words
government.
of the United Nations, sir.
These are the words of the United Nations. They are on the UN list of terrorist organizations. So them being a terrorist organizations, however, now they are being whitewashed and reintroduced to Syria as potential legitimate political actors. Unfortunately, the American mainstream media, which is aligned with the current US administration, is doing this bidding, as evident with the recent interview with by a US mainstream media outlet with Ahmad al-Shara, also known as his nom de guerre, which everyone knew him by for the past 10 years or more, Abu Muhammad al-Julani. And now they are being reintroduced, and they are the dominant force, of course, in Syria, and they seem to be leading the multitude of rebel factions. However, will HTS manage to consolidate power and actually impose complete control and exercise complete political control of Syria? This remains to be seen, and I do not believe they have the capacity to do that as of yet. And I
Okay,
think
sir, how do you witness what's going to take place in Syria in the coming days or in the coming months or in the future?
If I am to be optimistic, and I'm not, however, if I try to pretend to be optimistic, maybe a political settlement will be reached and an agreement between the various rebel groups to indulge in.
Sir, all these rebel groups together are gonna make a political solution?
I'm saying when I'm being unrealistically optimistic, I would say so. Of course, this probably will not happen, but just to complete my thought, if they decide to engage in a political process under within the auspices of UN Resolution 2254, maybe then, and the creation of a new constitution and a modern democratic state open to diversity, maybe then we might find a solution. And this is completely unlikely. What is actually likely is that Syria will descend into another cycle of civil war and internal strife, which will result in more bloodshed. Syria has lost over 600,000 people over the past 16 years, and it pains me to say that more people, more lives will be lost.
What's happening pains us all, sir. How do you foresee the role of key Arab states in pushing for a peaceful settlement in Syria as soon as possible?
I think key Arab states like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and others are being the most responsible players at the moment with regards to Syria. Yesterday, 5 Arab states held a meeting in Doha on the margins of the Doha Forum. And those 5 states are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan, and they held a ministerial summit, a foreign ministerial summit with the Asatana framework countries, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. And these 8 countries.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
8 countries have agreed to pursue a peaceful settlement in Syria and an orderly political transition, and this is the path they are willing to support. If these Arab countries, along with Russia, Turkey, and Iran, can actually come together to form a vision to move forward, I think Syria has a chance to avoid descending into another civil war. But of course, we have.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Osman, how do you assess the situation at this point in Syria in light of course, everything that's taking place and the role of the United States and Russia? Where do they stand from all that's happening and taking place?
Of course, the United States, I believe, even though they never expressed that openly, I believe they have been fully behind what has happened in Syria, and they have provided support through Turkey and maybe even direct support to many of these armed factions and rebel groups and even terrorist organizations that are fighting, that fought the Syrian government for the past few years. And I think they have a lot to gain by the fall of the Assad regime, as it curtails Russian influence inside Syria and the Middle East. And it also, as I said before, it completely eliminates Iran from the Syrian equation. On the other hand, Russia, of course, what happened in Syria is a substantial blow to Russian influence in Syria. However, Russia still maintains a large presence in Syria. It does maintain several military bases, including the massive naval base in Tartus and the Hamaymim air base. And these areas have been untouched by the insurgents or the militants. These areas were not attacked. These bases were not attacked. And it seems that the Russians have reached some sort of understanding with these armed factions in order to maintain their presence. And on the other hand, I think the armed factions are not interested in provoking a war with the Russians, because this would cost them dearly, and they tried that before from 2016, 2015 to 2019, and they were on the losing end of the war at the end of the day. So I think they will be reaching an understanding, and I think maybe even the Russians and the Americans have reached an understanding regarding Syria.
Hopefully, sir. Dr. Mohammed Osman, thank you so much for your constructive, informative knowledge, and I can't thank you enough. An international relations specialist from Cairo. Thanks for your insights again.